Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming out here. It's really great to see such a large group in this wonderful bookstore, so thank you. I'm going to introduce the book a little bit and then focus on the chapter on same-sex marriage. So, I knew that this was the path I wanted, said a young gay man to sociologist Rich Savin Williams about his early sexual experiences with other male teens, and I knew that I was on it. I knew that some could sort of experience what I was, and I knew that other people would think of it as being pretty disgusting. This book, although it's concerned with abstract issues of constitutional law, is essentially about that divide that the teen saw before him, between people who can sort of experience what a gay teenager goes through, and people who simply think of those desires, and no doubt the teenagers themselves, as being disgusting. For a long time, our society, like many others, has confronted same-sex orientations and acts with a politics of disgust, as many people react to the uncomfortable presence of gays and lesbians with a deep aversion akin to that often inspired by bodily waste, slimy insects, spoiled food, and then they cite that very reaction to support a range of legal restrictions, from sodomy laws to bans on same-sex marriage. Partisans of the politics of disgust can barely stand to think about what that gay teenager did with his friends. They say, oh, that stuff makes me want to throw up. And they turn away from the reality of gay life as from a loathsome contaminant to the body politic. Although this political approach has lost a lot of ground in recent years, it continues to influence the ways in which many people think. Disgust, so described, seems pretty nasty, a fundamental refusal of another person's full humanity. One might therefore just think it's obvious that it's a bad basis for lawmaking in a pluralistic society. Disgust, however, has had some highly respectable and influential defenders in the law. In Britain in the 1950s, Lord Patrick Devlin argued very prominently that the disgust of an average member of society was a sufficient reason to make a practice illegal, even if it was consensual and caused no harm to non-consenting third parties. He was writing directly in response to the Wolfenden Commission's recommendation to decriminalize same-sex consensual acts, which he strongly opposed. He argued that society would decay from within if it did not make law in response to the majority's feelings of disgust. More recently, in the U.S., Leon Cass, who until very recently was the head of the President's Council for Bioethics under President Bush, argued that repugnance has an inherent wisdom. He said it was a device implanted in our natures that steers us away from destructive and terrible choices. Like Devlin, Cass concludes that disgust is a sufficient reason to ban a practice that causes no harm to non-consenting parties. Nor are these positions only academic, they're in tune with widespread social forces. In recent years, large segments of the Christian right openly practice a politics based upon disgust, depicting the sexual practices of lesbians, and I think perhaps especially of gay men, as vile and revolting. They suggest that such practices contaminate and defile society, producing social decay and degeneration. Like Cass and Devlin, they seem to believe that disgust is a reliable guide to lawmaking. Although the influence of those appeals peaked perhaps in the 1980s and 1990s and has been a little bit declining, the politics of disgust continues to exercise influence, often in more subtle and underground ways. So we need to understand why it's not a good approach to politics and law in a democratic society. Well, to begin with, the politics of disgust is profoundly at odds with the abstract idea of a society based on the equality of all citizens, in which all have a right to the equal protection of the laws. It says that the mere reason that you inspire some pretty strong emotions in me is reason enough for me to seek the aid of law to treat you as a social pariah, denying you some of your most basic entitlements as a citizen. Even the U.S. Supreme Court held in Romer versus Evans that legal deference to this type of animus, as they put it, violates the very idea of the equal protection of the laws in its most basic and general form. It also violates a fundamental paradigm of political rationality. Laws made in response to such animus lack, they said, a rational basis. Despite such legal setbacks in recent years, the politics of disgust, as I say, is alive and well in America, as groups often put forward other arguments on the surface, but when you press them, and I think we'll see this in a minute with same-sex marriage, the politics of disgust ultimately reveals its hand. So I think a closer study of the emotion of disgust and the ways in which it's been used politically throughout history will help us understand what's going on and suggest some very powerful arguments against disgust's apostles in theory and practice by showing how that emotion expresses a universal human discomfort with bodily reality, but then uses that discomfort to target and subordinate vulnerable minorities. And I use often parallels to misogyny and to the history of the role played by disgust and ideas of contamination in American racism to make my case. Now, disgust today has two opponents, each increasingly powerful in our social, political, and even legal life: respect and sympathy. The idea of equal respect for persons, surely a key concept throughout the history of American democracy, combined with a high evaluation of personal liberty, suggests to many citizens that even when they don't think well of someone's intimate personal choices, they should give them space to make them, so long as they don't violate other people's rights. Such a politics of equal respect and equal liberty has long been our norm in the area of religion, where we're just used to the idea that we must live on terms of equal respect with people whose choices we think not very good or perhaps even sinful, and to the related idea that such deeply meaningful personal choices require the protection for all, and on a basis of equality, of spheres of personal liberty. The object of respect is the person, not the person's actions, but respecting one's fellow citizens as equals, a long tradition holds, requires seeing them as choosers and seekers who need a wide area of liberty around them, whether they use that liberty from one's own point of view, well or poorly, so long as they don't trample on the rights of others. Many people, I included, see sexual orientation as similar, a characteristic intimately connected with a person's search for a meaningful life, and therefore something whose abridgment or legal restriction inflicts profound harm to the very idea of citizens' equality. Equal respect precludes the infliction of such limitations on those who simply seek to act on their desires without violating the rights of others. A politics of equal respect is also by now the norm in the areas of gender, race, and disability, where we've gradually come to see that deep-seated characteristics are not a legitimate basis for the systematic subordination of a group. Many people now feel, once again, that sexual orientation is, in important ways, like these other areas. Like race and gender, sexual orientation is a deep-seated characteristic that has profound meaning for people, affecting their possibilities for self-expression and for happiness. It should not be turned into a systematic source of social inequality. Equal respect for citizens, many now hold, requires not converting a person's sexual orientation into a reason for denying them a wide range of political entitlements on a basis of equality with others, any more than a person's race or gender or disability would be such a reason. Now, that gay teenager needs and deserves equal respect and a sphere of liberty equal to that enjoyed by others. Before he's likely to get those things, however, something else also has to be present in our world, as his own perceptive comment suggested: the capacity to imagine his experience and that of other gay and lesbian citizens. Disgust feeds on moral obtuseness. It's possible to view another human being as a slimy slug or a piece of revolting trash only if one has never made a serious good faith attempt to see the world through that person's eyes or to experience that person's feelings. Humanity does not automatically reveal itself to strangers. No placard hung on the front of a fellow citizen announces that this one is a full-fledged human being and not a bug or a piece of refuse. seeing the shape of a human being before us, we always have choices to make.